I'm Josie Bello, that's Frank Bello. We're coming to you from our house to your temporary house, Hope House. We chose the song Hang Tough because we know you can. You went and claimed me from life's lost and found. I was desperate for someone to pull me out. Bound in chains I could not break free. My life defined by a harsh reality. You didn't save me, I had to save myself. But you inspired me like no one else. Broken hearted, you helped me see. Changing myself to change my reality. Sometimes without warning, life will go as planned. Other times you're dealt a new hand. Smooth times or wrong, gotta hang tough. Everything changes, even us. Gotta hold steady and hang tough. Oh, gotta hold steady and hang tough. We live in a world of constant change. And within us, we can do the same. Locked in thinking that we cannot. Keeps us from dreaming of possibilities. Sometimes without warning, life will go as planned. Other times you're dealt a whole new hand. Smooth times or rough, you gotta hang tough. Everything changes, even us. You gotta hold steady and hang tough. Oh, you gotta hold steady and hang tough. You gotta believe in yourself and the power that lies within. Change yourself, you change your world. It's up to you if you sink or swim. Sometimes without warning, life will go as planned. Other times you're dealt a whole new hand. Smooth times or rough, you gotta hang tough. Everything changes, even us. Gotta hold steady and hang tough. You're stronger than you know. You gotta hold steady and hang tough. Oh, you gotta hold steady and hang tough.
Right? That's the way to go.
Nope.
Hey, Randy, you are muted. What is a relay event?
Sorry, I thought you were going to mute me on that end. Let's try this again. Heading south to the land of the pines, thumbing my way out of North Carolina. I'm standing on the road and praying to God to see headlights. Well, I made it up the coast in 17 hours, picking me a bouquet of dogwood flowers. I'm hoping for a Raleigh so I can see my baby tonight. Oh, rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me. Oh, rock me, mama, like the wind and the rain. Rock me, mama, like a southbound train. Hey, mama, rock me. Headed from the cold, coming off the New England. I was born to be a fiddler in an old-time string band. My baby plays the guitar, I pick up banjo now. Well, there's no country when the says are getting me down. Lost my money playing poker, so I had to leave town. But I ain't going back, living that old life no more. Oh, rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me. Oh, rock me, mama, like the wind and the rain. Rock me, mama, like a southbound train. Hey, mama, rock me. Heading south out of Roanoke, I found a trucker out of Philly, had a nice long tote. But he's heading west through the Cumberland Gap to Johnston City, Tennessee. Well, I gotta get a move while I am beyond the sun. Well, I hear my baby calling and I know that she's the only one. And if I die in Raleigh, at least I will die free. Oh, rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me. Oh, rock me, mama, like the wind and the rain. Rock me, mama, like a southbound train. Hey, mama, rock me. Oh, rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me. Oh, rock me, mama, like the wind and the rain. Rock me, mama, like a southbound train. Hey, mama, rock me.
For the first time in our history, our mission to save lives and to celebrate lives in the face of cancer is at risk. Because we can't walk outside together, it's harder than ever to fight together. And when we can't come together, we give cancer a chance to gain ground. That's why we need your help. Donate today to the American Cancer Society and help us fund the critical services our patients need right now.
All right. Hey, everybody. Joe Gillette here, longtime ACS volunteer, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, where we are holding our own Shuck Cancer viewing party. Let's hear it, Brooklyn. Woo! Yeah. So we got quite the crew, but I don't want to put them on camera. They're a little bit scary, but we're all here, and we want to welcome you, participants from 15 states across this nation, to Shuck Cancer Coast to Coast. Now, we all know the world is a little bit turned upside down right now, but unfortunately, the fight against cancer doesn't stop. And the research funded by the American Cancer Society must go on. That's why my buddy and co-host Steve Bell and I have put together this series of coast-to-coast events. We think that by collaborating and putting together quality virtual events, we can unite passionate and creative volunteers and supporters, such as yourselves, to continue to support the mission of the American Cancer Society from wherever you are. People still want to support this fight that we're leading, and we should all continue to be unapologetic as we fundraise for a cure. Now, tonight's kind of special because not only are we fundraising for the American Cancer Society, but our theme is oysters, and a portion of the proceeds tonight are going to go to the Billion Oyster Project, which is really dedicated to sustainability and making sure that oysters can kind of repopulate our waters like they did, many years ago. So again, two great non-for-profits tonight: the American Cancer Society and the Billion Oyster Project. Tonight, our program's going to be great. We're raising clams with oysters with a celebrity lineup that's not to be believed. We have international oyster expert Julie Qiu, nationally ranked oyster shucker Gardner Douglas, the Billion Oyster Project founder Pete Malinowski, and chef and ACS supporter extraordinaire, Robin Selden. At this point, I want to turn the program over to my buddy, Steve Bell, my partner in the fight against cancer. Steve, take it on.
Thanks, Joe. And I am so excited to be here today and participating in Shuck Cancer. Like Joe said, we've had two events so far, coast-to-coast events. And one of them was a wine tasting event, and one was a comedy night. And we've really had to learn to adapt. Volunteers with the American Cancer Society are very good at adapting. We've had to learn to adapt in these trying times because cancer has not stopped. The mission continues. The American Cancer Society, like a lot of nonprofits, has been devastated by this and its fundraising to fund the mission of the American Cancer Society. And so thank you for joining us tonight. Myself, I'm a 23-year colorectal cancer survivor. And I took my first relay lap back in 1999 when I stepped on a track to celebrate my own survivorship. And if any of you have ever experienced a relay for life, there's nothing like the survivor lap. And I was hooked. And from that point on, I decided I wasn't only going to celebrate my survivorship, but I was going to celebrate the survivorship of at what that time was over 9 million cancer survivors in the United States. And you know what? Today, we have over 17 million cancer survivors. So what we are doing is really making a difference. So I want to thank our celebrities tonight for joining us. And coming up in the show, we have one of the most respected oyster experts, as Joe said, a nationally ranked shucker, an honored chef, as well as a top aquaculture conservationist. So I hope you have your mise en place ready. That and more is ahead in our program tonight as we go from east to west to raise clams for ACS and the Billion Oyster Project. So my first introduction tonight is oyster sommelier Julie Qiu. Julie Qiu is an international oyster expert and founder of In a Half Shell, an oyster appreciation website. She is based in Brooklyn, New York, but will travel anywhere for oyster adventures. Julie shares her knowledge and love of house shell culture through master classes, bespoke events, original digital content, and products designed for like-minded oyster enthusiasts. As a self-described oyster sommelier, Julie has been covered by Vogue, Food and Wine, the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, NPR, Huffington Post, Tech Insider, and Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Julie.
Wow. All right. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. It's so amazing to be here. I'm very honored to be part of this event, as I'm sure everybody has a story of, you know, cancer and cancer survivorship touching their lives or their friends' lives. So very excited. But with the short amount of time that we have, I really want to talk about oysters and give you guys a crash course in oysters as best as I can before handing it off to other experts. What can I say? I mean, you know, when you're thinking oyster sommelier, that is unheard of, and it's true. I sort of made it up because there wasn't quite a position like that I felt like, you know, it needed to exist, and I decided to do it. Mostly because oysters are such a social food, and every culture that I've traveled to and have experienced the cuisine of, oysters bring people together, and it's almost impossible to eat oysters in a bad mood. Like, you just don't go to an oyster bar and be grumpy about it. They're also incredibly healthy as a food. They're low in calorie. They're really high in essential vitamins and minerals, incredibly high in zinc. So if you have oysters in front of you, if you're eating 6, you are getting over 200% of your daily value of zinc. And, you know, with everybody needing to boost their immune systems nowadays, I think that's a really good thing. Oysters are also really sustainable, and Pete will talk a little bit more about that, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that almost like 95% of all oysters that we eat today are responsibly farmed. The farmers all across the world are really the stewards of our ocean health and the health of our coastal communities. And oysters are eating the nutrients, the algae in the water. So you're not feeding them, they're actually regulating the environment. So it's incredibly sustainable and really important for our environment for oysters to be there. Even with so much farming, they haven't really changed all that much in thousands of years. You know, you have these oyster middens, like these piles of shells found in different parts of every continent. And we know that indigenous cultures have really relied on shellfish for sustenance, and different cultures have also sought them out, like the Romans, the Greeks, all over the place, including North America. Actually, I believe that when the settlers first came to New York, they were pretty much wowed by the oyster population of New York Harbor. And that was one of the biggest draws of New York City, which is probably why I live here. It used to be, you know, the oyster town of America. So trying to bring that back. And, you know, finally, they're incredibly delicious. And that's really what started me on this journey of learning more about oysters. So to give you a quick overview, when you go into an oyster bar, or if you look at an oyster menu, there are so many different kinds now. You can find all different sorts of names from different places, and it can get a little overwhelming. What I find is to be helpful is to understand that all of the different variations that you see really come down to 5 different oyster species. So if you think about oysters like wine, you know, you have your red grape varietals and your white grape varietals. In oysters, there are 5 species. And on the East Coast, you have one native species called the Chrysosteris vernitica, and that species is grown all the way up in like the northern part of Eastern Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico. And depending on where it's grown, it will taste different, it's called something different, it will look different, go to market in different conditions. On the West Coast, you also have primarily 2-3 species of oyster. One is called the Pacific oyster. The native one is called the Olympia, which is a tiny little thing. If you happen across it, you should definitely give it a try. Very small, packed with flavor, it's great. And then the Kumamoto, which a lot of you probably know is also grown on the West Coast. And then the final species is the European native oyster, which can actually be found in parts of the Northeast, specifically like Maine or New England. They are a much flatter oyster. I would say they're a oyster lovers or oyster connoisseurs oyster because they have incredible mineral taste that sort of hits the back of your mouth or the palate that you will not forget. And if you do come across those, make sure you save them for last, because after you eat them, you really can't taste anything else. So about oyster tasting, which is what I'm most passionate about, is really focused on just raw oysters. And when you're eating raw oysters, essentially eating just like freshly killed oysters. Oysters should be pretty much alive before you eat them, like shuck them and open them and eat them raw. They will, vary in different qualities, in sizes, in salinities. And the thing to understand is the oyster really tastes like where it comes from. And that sense of it being site expressive is a term that oyster nerds will use called terroir. It's named after the French term terroir for wine, which is like kind of all the nutrients in the soil. It creates the characteristics of the wine. Same with oysters or other shellfish too, but primarily with oysters, the water salinity, the amount of rainfall even, what the sea bottom is made of, what kind of algae is in the water, that all contributes to the unique flavor profile of the oyster. If you really want to get nerdy about it, there's a way to track, the different attributes of salinity, sweetness, body, other flavor profiles. I developed like this little booklet where you can just take notes like a nerd. You can, but that is a good way to keep track of all of the different qualities throughout the year, because you will notice that they will change from time to time. If you are new to oysters and you want to know what are the best oysters to get, well, it depends on if you are buying them direct from a farm, which you can do now, and you definitely should, because farmers need all the help they can get. Or if you're going to a restaurant, I would say ask your server. If you know that you have a preference of smaller or larger oysters, definitely start out with specifying that. And then go into salinity, because the oysters can taste very mild in salinity to very strong, and then maybe express assertiveness in flavor. So not necessarily the characteristics and flavor that you want, but if you want something that's very rich, umami packed, maybe a little bit funky, you can talk about that. Or if you want something clean and crisp, like a crisp white wine, there's other oysters that are fitting of that profile. So I would say that those three characteristics are what you should be asking your server for. And also, if you're at a raw bar, make sure you get really buddy with your shucker, because your shucker is everything at a raw bar. Your shucker is like your barista or your mixologist or your sushi master. They give that experience to you, and they're the last person who touches that oyster. And I find them so important to having a good oyster experience outside of the home. And in the home, there's other things that you need to learn, which is how to buy your oysters, storing oysters properly, shucking them, which Gardner is going to get into. All of that is actually very, very learnable. And if we had time later, if people have questions, I will definitely answer them that way. And finally, I think oysters, another thing I love about them is that they really are a food that you have to travel for. Like my bio said, I will literally, go places when I was able to do that to eat oysters, because every continent has oyster production and oyster lovers, and each oyster will taste like exactly where that place comes from. And there's a lot of amazing culture that you can learn and exchange with other oyster lovers out there. So definitely, also, it doesn't hurt that oyster farms are located in some of the most beautiful places in the world. So, if you're up for it, get some oyster buddies. And once we're able to get outside of the country, head out there. So I think that's it for me in the short amount of time that I have. That's a super crash course. But if you have other questions, definitely you can check out my website. It's inahalfshell.com. I'll just leave it in the comments as well later on. And you can also find me on Instagram. And feel free to ask me any rando questions at all.
Thanks, Julie. You know, I didn't know a couple things. I didn't know there were 5 varieties of oysters. I knew they were high in zinc, but I didn't realize how high in zinc, and I know they're very good for you from a diet perspective. One thing that somebody asked, and I think this question is directed towards you and not towards somebody in general, but Ruth asked, can you tell where an oyster is from when you eat it?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, I can tell you which species it is. And if you give me, you know, if you give me a list of maybe 6 places, I can probably narrow it down. It's really about looking at the shell. The shell will tell you a lot of, not necessarily geographically where it's located, but how it was grown, maybe what kind of environment it was in. That's very telling. And then when you taste it, you can taste that salinity, which gives you a sense of whether or not it's grown closer to the ocean or closer to a freshwater source. So yeah, in some ways you can, by just looking and tasting the oyster, know the environment that it is, but I wouldn't necessarily venture to say like, oh, I can instantly tell that this oyster is from Rhode Island versus one from Massachusetts, unless if you give me maybe a couple of those options.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Julie.
Yeah, no problem.
So like Julie talked about, your experience when you go have oysters is not an experience unless you have a true bona fide shucker. I still get myself giggling over that term shucker, but we are so excited because tonight we have a nationally ranked shucker, and Gardner Douglas is that shucker. And Gardner Douglas is also known as the Oyster Ninja, the Oyster Ninja. And he is a U.S. Army veteran, and thank you very much, Gardner, for your service. He's based out of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and learned the art of shucking from his father and fellow shucking champion, Samuel Sam Fisher. Gardner has shucked at the best raw bars in Washington, D.C. and at D.C.'s most premier events. He also runs his own oyster catering service and mobile raw bar. Gardner is a nationally ranked oyster shucker, and he can be heard sharing his knowledge about oysters and shucking skills with the world via his podcast, The Oyster Ninja. So let's turn it over to Gardner.
Hey, what's going on, good people? Gardner Douglas, your oyster ninja, and I'm going to teach you how to shuck oysters. So today, I just happened to meet up with an oyster farmer, Rogue Oysters. They're near the Rappahannock, right on the Rappahannock, actually. And I also have some twin hooks from the Eastern Shore. So it's a couple of styles of ways that I like to shuck, and that is, of course, from the hinge or the back of the oyster, as you can see. So, and that's the most important thing, I think, for shucking oysters. You need to know the anatomy or just know your way around the oyster. So this would be the mouth of the oyster. Uh-oh, there we go. This will be like the mouth of the oyster here. And this is the back or the hinge. And as you can see, this doesn't have a deep cup, but this does. If you can see the difference, nice little deep cup. Let's see if I can see. Sorry, technical difficulties. I'm gonna take this background off so you guys can see. Okay, focus on me, not the playground, all right. So this has a nice deep cup, and all this comes from farming. You know, when they tumble the oysters and it goes around and around, instead of the oyster growing out, now it's growing down, so the cup can be nice and fat. And oyster shucker loves that. I'm sure you guys love it too, eating a nice plump oyster. But anyway, let's get into shucking, right? So like I said, this is the back of the oyster or the hinge, and this is the front or the mouth. And most importantly, our number one goal is to cut the adductor muscle right here. So you have a adductor here that's attached to the top of the shell, and an adductor here that's attached to the bottom of the shell. Boom. So right here and right here. So when I'm looking at an oyster, I see that nice gap, and even you guys can see it here. It's that little black spot right there. And the oyster knife just fits right in there so nicely. Now, use gloves. Don't be like me, okay? I got the wounds to prove it, but hey, my hands are a lot stronger now, but don't do that, okay? So you want cup down. You want to place the knife in. You want to give it a couple wiggles. Now, once you give it those wiggles, the oyster is in there. Look at that, abracadabra. Look at that. It's in there, not going anywhere. So now you're just gonna turn it like a doorknob. And I thought I was gonna use my other camera, but this looks pretty good right here. So we're gonna turn it like a doorknob. Knock, knock. I don't know if y'all heard that pop, but it was a nice little pop. And now look, we got an even bigger gap here. And I'm gonna do this one backwards just because, but you know, you would just slide that knife down, slide it, and look, abracadabra again. This is magic. What's behind your ear? Look at that. We got it. So now you got the oyster, right? But it's still connected to the bottom. So what you want to do is disconnect that bottom adductor muscle. Let's hope it doesn't fall on the ground. Boom. So we're just going to disconnect that. And I don't know if you guys can hear that, but listen. That's all shell. That's all you want to hit. So when you're basically scraping the shell, so you can disconnect that bottom muscle. And then of course you just wanna devour this bad baby. I'm not gonna eat it because it's a sweet oyster. I like salty oysters, but you know, let's do it anyway. Because not just shucking an oyster, but you wanna make sure no shell is in here, no dirt, no grit. So you just wanna, you know, if you see any shell debris, just wipe that away. But also eating it properly is important also. So you want to put this, and it's a couple ways. So you can go over top, give it a kiss, boom, bam, you're done. Or you can put your lip to the lip of the oyster and let it roll off, because if it's shucked properly, it's gonna fall right out. Uh-oh, it didn't fall right out, but that's good. Patrick Murray said something about that suction. So I'm gonna give it another little wiggle. 1 second, daddy duty. What's up? Okay, you good, hold on. Wiggle. Give it a couple chews. That's perfect. That's a nice, sweet, mineral oyster. Not a lot to it, but we've also had a lot of rain here in Virginia and Maryland. So that's to be expected. Next up, I'm gonna do a salty oyster, and I'm gonna go from the front. So from the front, you're gonna go, still same thing. I got my shuck crew here. Same thing. We got some new growth here on the oyster. So you wanna place the knife on that new growth. I don't know how good you can see it, but it's right on the tip. Apply a little pressure. Again, you can see that juice coming out, but don't worry about losing the juice. The juice is okay. Again, you want to guide that knife on the bottom of the shell. That's why it's important to know about the anatomy. Hey. We got people here that's watching me shuck these oysters, okay? It's like 1,000,001, but I was being modest. So you're gonna just wiggle, because again, you're disconnecting that bottom muscle. Now look, you can see what's going on. Boom. And now we're gonna disconnect the top. And this is called stabbing. So the first was called hen shucking. The second is called stabbing. I'm gonna enjoy this oyster a little bit better only because it's saltier from the Eastern Shore, my home. Let's go, again, mouth to mouth. Well, we did that the first time. Let's switch it up this time. Let's go over top. So salty, so good. Wash it down with a brew. Cheers. I'm done. Any questions? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm done.
Well, we got to find out from you, Gardner, how do you become a nationally ranked shucker?
So the nationally ranked oyster shucking competition is held in St. Mary's County down in Leonard Wood, Maryland. Of course, I think this year they're going to do a virtual event, but so yeah, so it's this year they're going to do it virtually, but it's going to be for fun. But we're still going to come together as one. You know, we're all in this together, so we gotta help each other out, and you know. So yeah, it's speed and quality. So it's not just how many oysters you can shuck, but you know, it's 24 oysters, and then you shuck, and then whatever time you get from that is like your raw or flat time. And then the judges get to it, and then they look at it, and then and then they give you penalties for dirt, shell in the oyster. If you leave blood in the oyster, hey, it happens. You know, all of that. Or if the oyster is not on the shell, so then you get penalty points, and that adds on to your time. So the goal is to be fast and clean. And one of those years, I got lucky, you know, and I was fast and clean.
Wow, that's interesting. You ever find a pearl in one?
I find pearls every now and then, mostly in wild oysters, but not a lot in the farm-raised oysters.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Gardner, for your time. That was fascinating. There was a lot of chat in the box that's talking about we had no idea about how to do this kind of thing. So, I know that Margaret is raving about the oysters that you sent to her. So thank you very much, Gardner.
My pleasure.
So next we're going to go back to our entertainment for tonight. I didn't get a chance to properly introduce, this is Randy Steiner, and he is a avid supporter of the Relay for Life in Orange County, California. He goes to all the different events and donates his time and his musical band, which is a pretty cool name, All Night Meat Bingo. Tonight he's going solo, so I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Randy.
Thanks, Steve. Early one morning, the sun was shining. I was laying in bed, wondering if she changed at all, if her hair was still red. Her folks, they said our lives together sure was gonna be rough. They never did like Mama's homemade dress, Papa's banquet wasn't big enough. And I was standing on the side of the road, rain falling on my shoe, heading on for the East Coast. Lord knows I paid some dues getting through. Tangled up in blue. She was mad when we first met, soon to be divorced. Helped her out of a jam, I guess, but I used a little too much force. So we drove that car as far as we could, abandoned it out west. Split up on the docks at night, both agreeing it was best. She turned around and looked at me as I was walking away. Heard her say over my shoulder, we'll meet again someday on the avenue. Tangled up in blue. I had a job in the great Northwood, working as a cook for a spell. But I never did like it all that much. One day the axe just fell. So I drifted down to New Orleans, where I was lucky enough to be employed. Working for a while on an oyster boat right outside of Delacroix. But all the while I was alone, past was close behind. I've seen a lot of women, but she never escaped my mind. And I just grew tangled up in blue. She was working in a topless place, and I stopped in for a beer. I just kept looking at the side of her face, and the spotlight so clear. And then later on, when the crowd thinned out, I was just about to do the same. She was standing there, in back of my chair, saying, "Tell me, don't I know your name?" I muttered something underneath my breath, and she studied the lines on my face. I must admit, felt a little uneasy when she bent down to tie the lace of my shoe. Tangled up in blue. like a silent tide. Then she opened up a book of poems, handed it to me, written by an Italian poet from the 15th century. And every one of them words rang true and glowed like burning coal, pouring off of every page like it was written in my soul. From me to you, tangled up in blue. Well, I lived with him on Montague Street in a basement down the stairs. There was music in the cafes and dying revolution in the air. Then he started in a theater and said something inside of him died. He had said everything she owned and froze up inside. And when finally the bottom fell out, I became withdrawn. The only thing I knew how to do was to keep on keeping on like a bird that flew, tangled up in blue. So now I'm going back again. I gotta get to her somehow. All the people we used to know, they're an illusion to me now. Some are mathematicians, some are carpenters' wives. Don't know how it all got started. I don't know what they do with their lives. But me, I'm still on the road, heading for another joint. We always did feel the same. We just saw from a different point of view. Tangled up in blue. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy Steiner. So I have to apologize. For some reason, the way the Zoom was set up, should have been when we do Spotlight, the individual that's talking should be right in the center of the screen. For some reason, it's still showing a gallery view, so I apologize for that. But we've learned about oysters, a lot about oysters. We've learned how to shuck oysters. Now we're going to learn how to cook oysters. And so we're very excited tonight to have Executive Chef and ACS Supporter Extraordinaire, Robin Selden. And Robin Selden is the Managing Partner and Executive Chief of Marcia Selden Catering and Event Planning, a Connecticut-based caterer orchestrating premier parties and weddings throughout the tri-state area. She has cooked for commanding companies, countless celebrities, and political dignitaries, including 3 former US presidents. Robin was named ICA Chef of the Year at CaterSource, and her motto is, "It's never good enough." She strives to push the envelope in her staff in every way to make them the best that they can be. Robin is also a longtime supporter of the American Cancer Society and loves to fund the mission. So, Robin, I am going to turn it over to you. And you need to, hold on 1 second, Robin, you're still muted. Can you unmute your screen? For some reason it's.
Okay, can you guys hear me? I'm so excited. Can you hear me? I hope. Steve?
We can hear you, sorry.
Oh, great, wonderful, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm just gonna start my little timer because I'm making a bit of an overachiever, and I'm gonna do 2 recipes for you in my time because I had to do something on the East Coast and something on the West Coast with these oysters. So thank you for having me. When I started to think about oysters and that I was going to actually be hopefully taking somebody who was a little reluctant from eating oysters and turning them and recruiting them to suddenly love oysters, I thought, let me think of some fun things that could potentially, you know, jazz up these oysters. So my first oyster that I'm doing is a French onion oyster. I mean, who does not love French onion soup, right? I got these beautiful oysters from my friends in Norwalk, Connecticut. These are fresh farmed oysters. They're Blue Point oysters from Cobb's Island, and they are delicious. A little sweet, not that briny, and they're amazing. So what we're gonna do is I've started actually sauteing my onions and my garlic and shallots, and I'm gonna add the rest of them in right now. And when you caramelize onions, there's a lot of sugar in them. And so you've got to cook them low and slow because you want them to take the time to develop the flavor and also to caramelize. Because at the end of the day, what you're looking for is something in this gorgeous golden brown color, which is when you make French onion soup, how it gets that brown, like yummy flavor to it. It's because the onions have caramelized and cooked a really long time. So we're gonna let those cook. I'm just gonna add my parsley and my thyme into that. One little trick with thyme, if anyone doesn't know how to get it off of here, you go opposite the way it's growing and you just pull down and the leaves will come right off for you. Give this a little stir, hit it with some salt and pepper, and to be honest, leave it. Just let it hang out. You don't need to like give it a lot of love. It'll just start to caramelize and cook, and it's gonna look gorgeous like this. So how you're going to make these oysters is these have been shucked already. I shucked them a little earlier before we started. And I'm not as good as Gardner, but at least I got them done, and I think I did a pretty good job. There's no shells in here. And we're gonna spread the top of them with the caramelized onion. This is something that you guys can do ahead of time when before your guests are arriving. You're gonna hit it with a little shaved Gruyere cheese, which is such a delicious cheese. And then I made a mixture of panko breadcrumbs and Parmesan cheese, because, I mean, come on, you need a little more cheese. And you want to give it that flavor that a French onion soup has, which is that bread. And it also helps to give you that great crust. So this is what they're going to look like, if you can see, prior to going into your oven. Once you get your entire tray done, you've got your preheated broiler oven going, and about 6 inches from the broiler, you're gonna wanna pop those in and give them about 5-6 minutes, depending upon your oven, and definitely keep an eye on them. And at the end, what you're gonna get is this gorgeous, delicious oyster that's got this French onion topping. And I'm not telling you that it's gonna mask the flavor, because you're still gonna get that delicious, sweet oyster in there, but it just gives it a little, kind of ups the ante here. So that's our first one, and I hope you guys try it, because you'll be all getting the recipe shortly after our Zoom call. And now let's move on to this next one. And by the way, I developed these recipes just for you. We have never made them at Marcia Selden Catering before, and I am like honored to tell you that these were just done for you. There was one other that I shared that was a Florentine one that I know Joe made, is making tonight. That one we've made. So our next one that we're doing is a fried oyster. This is called a bolt wrap. It's a bacon, oyster, lettuce, and tomato wrap. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think BLT is kind of one of the most iconic American sandwiches out there. And what better than to add a crispy, delicious oyster, right? So I got some Kumamotos from the West Coast, because I had to have you guys represented also out there. And I shucked them, I took them out of the shell, and then I wanted to just sort of dry them out a little. So I had them on a paper towel just to kind of get rid of some of that juice that Gardner was talking about. And then I took them, once they were done, and I soaked them in buttermilk. And you don't really want to keep them in buttermilk for too long, but I'd say about, 5 or so minutes. And then this mixture here is what I did, which we're going to dredge it in. And this is half cornmeal, half flour. It has cayenne pepper, paprika, garlic, salt, and pepper. And it's really quite easy. And you just have to get into a rhythm when you're doing something like this. You want to have a dry hand and a wet hand, because then you're going to keep yourself clean and your workstation clean. And since I'm a catering chef, I think beyond evoking joy through food and deliciousness and having you eat with your eyes, I also want to keep your kitchen super clean, and I want to keep myself clean so that when you walk in, you're like really happy that your kitchen's not a mess. So anyway, I've got my oyster here. I shake off that extra. I put it in with my dry hand. I turn it around. And this is what I've got. And since we don't really have time today, this would go into a preheated shallow frying pan of oil at about 350 degrees. And those will, it's actually 350 to 360 degrees. And those are going to fry up really nice and quick. And they're going to look like this. Can you see how yummy those look? I want to eat the whole tray, but I won't. Because first I have to finish my remoulade sauce for my bolt sandwich, because there's nothing better than some kind of creaminess that we're going to add to this sandwich. And what I'm doing, rather than making my remoulade with like a relish, I'm doing it with capers, because I find that the capers give that briny, delicious flavor that an oyster has. So it really complements it and it makes it even better. So I have a rough chop of a quarter cup of capers that I'm adding into my mayonnaise that also has some Dijon mustard and tarragon and salt and pepper and fresh lemon juice. Now, this is awesome on a lot of things. This is great on crab cakes. You could add lemon zest to it to bring up brightness to it. But for this, it's going to be our sauce. It's actually better tomorrow because it'll have the time to sort of meld together the flavors, but it's still going to be delicious today. And let me show you now how we're going to put this together. So we're going to take our butter lettuce. This is hydroponically grown butter lettuce. It's actually local from a farm in Connecticut. I love supporting local, whether it be a farmer for an oyster or a farmer of our produce, because there's nothing better and better tasting than something that comes in a local variety. So I'm going to take some of my remoulade sauce, and I'm just going to lay it down the sort of the center of my lettuce. Now, for those of you that are, wanting to do it, you could make this into like a po' boy and eat it on a hot dog roll. You could make it on a really thick, crusty sourdough, delicious bread. But I just wanted to kind of make it a little healthier because after all, it is fried. So I've got my lettuce ready. I have beautiful Roma tomatoes that are also from one of the farmers locally. I take one thin slice, put one on each of these. And then I've got nitrate-free, thick sliced smoked bacon that I crisped up. We're going to put one of those on each of these. And then one of our delicious oysters. Oh my God, my mouth is watering. These look so good. And there you have it. So these you could serve. They're like almost like little tacos. And I'm going to eat it. So what's so wonderful about this, you get the sweetness from the butter lettuce and the tomato and that brininess from the oyster and the remoulade sauce, and then bacon. Let's face it, guys, everything's better with bacon. I know it's not healthy, but I did nitrate free. So there you have it. I gave you two great applications to play with oysters, and I hope you enjoy it. If you'd like to find me, I'm on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram. My Instagram is @Robin Selden with an I, and my company is @Marsha Selden Catering. So I hope to see you guys. If anyone needs a party or ever wants any ideas or cooking fun or questions, please feel free to email me or DM me on social media. And thank you guys again for helping and being a part of this. I'm honored to be with these other celebrities because I am definitely not an oyster aficionado, but I love to eat them and I love to cook them. So thank you, and let's raise a lot of money.
Thanks, Robin. You know, people were not only drooling in the chat box, but they were also a little upset that you were getting to eat those and they weren't. Yeah, those two recipes were included in our Zoom invite, right? Because I remember.
So what we gave the mise en place if anyone wanted to cook with me, but what Margaret said is that after the Zoom, they're gonna email the 3 recipes, my Florentine one, which I didn't demo, and then these 2 as well, and everyone will have them.
Awesome. And then the question that we got in the chat box was, is vegetable oil the best for cooking the oysters?
Yes.
Okay, great, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
So now we've learned how to cook oysters, but you know what? The most important thing about this whole evening tonight, really, besides the mission of the American Cancer Society, is really oyster sustainability. Because if we eat more than we're producing, oysters aren't going to be around for future generations. And so it's our honor, pleasure to introduce to you the Billion Oyster Project founder, Pete Malinowski, and he has also a guest with him that he will be introducing. And Pete is the executive director and co-founder of the Billion Oyster Project. Pete grew up in an oyster farm on Fisher's Island in Long Island Sound. And in 2014, he launched the Billion Oyster Project with the goal of restoring the harbor's protective reefs and water quality. So Pete believes if we are to continue living on this planet, we have to completely change how we interact with the natural world. We can no longer live separate from nature. Nature is here and it is fighting back. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you Pete Malinowski.
All right. Thanks so much, Steve. It's great to be here with everyone. It's an honor to participate in this with this group for the American Cancer Society. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to give a little background about oyster sustainability, and I'll show some slides about our work. And then I'm really thrilled to introduce Frank Schwal, who's going to follow me up and talk about what it's like being a public school teacher working with Billion Oyster Project. And, you know, I don't think there's any harder job in the world right now than being a New York City public school teacher as we try to open schools back up. So really excited to have Frank here. But first, I'm going to share my screen and show you all some slides. So let's see if I can make that happen. All right. I'm going to assume that everyone can see my screen. Here we go. So as far as sustainability goes, Julie really did a great job talking through this, but I would just add that you know, oysters are, I describe them as the most sustainable protein source on the planet. They're almost entirely farmed, and the farms require no inputs. So no pesticides, herbicides, added water, food, fertilizer, any of that. The oysters eat what's naturally in the environment. They clean the water just by being there, and they provide habitat for other animals. So an oyster farm, one of the best things you can do for the environment as a consumer is buy farm shellfish. So good on all of you who did that for tonight. This is my folks' farm out on Fisher's Island. This is their grow out site. This is the nursery pond. So the oysters have about a 2 to 4 year life cycle before they find their way to market. And like Julie said, also, you know, you can generally find oyster farms in some of the prettiest places around, and this is no exception. This is the nursery pond on Fisher's Island, and then the grow out site. I actually think Julie took these pictures now that I think about it, but she's also a gifted photographer, obviously. But going into Billion Oyster Project, right, we, you know, New York City used to be this, or New York Harbor used to be this incredibly dynamic and productive ecosystem. And it was a big part of why the city was so successful to start was this abundance of animal protein at a time when finding enough to eat was a challenge. And so when Europeans first arrived in New York Harbor, they found a harbor that was totally full of fish and the skies that were totally full of birds, and oyster reefs were really the backbone of that ecosystem. And New York City was a harbor city and a port city, and there was a waterfront lifestyle. And now we find ourselves with the city today, after hundreds of years of pollution and over harvesting, we sort of lost that connection with the natural world, lost that connection with the harbor. And so New Yorkers, while most streets in New York City end at the water's edge, and many New Yorkers travel under or over rivers to get to and from work, we don't identify as living in a port city. We don't identify as living in, surrounded by nature. We want to change that by getting as many people as possible to participate in restoring oysters to New York Harbor. So the primary way that happens, the first way that happens, is through the New York Harbor School. The New York Harbor School is a public high school on Governor's Island, and Harbor School students do a lot of the heavy lifting of our oyster work. So Harbor School students specialize in one of 7 career classes, and we work to leverage the skills they're learning in those classes to do the work of Billion Oyster Project. And the idea is that the best way to improve outcomes for the natural world and outcomes for public school students is to train students to restore the environment. So here, our students are learning how to farm oysters and monitoring the oysters that they've grown and restored in Brooklyn Bridge Park. These are ocean engineering students who build remotely operated underwater vehicles, remote sensors, and do a lot of the 3-dimensional design for our reef structures. Students in the marine biology program conduct long-term science experiments that are often, that help inform our oyster restoration techniques. And students in the welding program and marine systems do build our oyster cages. So we design the reefs out of steel boxes so that the students who are learning to weld can leverage those skills to do the welding. And here you see students working with one of their instructors getting oyster cages ready for an installation that went down under the Mario Cuomo Bridge, the new Tappan Zee Bridge. And what we've done in recent years is we've taken that experience that the Harbor School students are having, and we've tried to expand it to schools throughout New York. So we work with about 100 middle schools in all 5 boroughs, and the idea is to shift what teaching science looks like in middle school science classes. So if you were like me, when you were learning about how nutrients flow through an ecosystem, you saw a food web that had pictures of prairie dogs and snakes, and we think that's a miss. So what we want students learning about are the horseshoe crabs and seahorses and striped bass and oysters and bluefish and blue crabs and lobsters and ospreys and all the animals that actually live here in New York City. And so we've developed education programs to do that. Here you can see students working together to restore a reef at Coney Island Creek. This is a cool project, and one that's been sort of the tip of a spear to get us more access to the creek, because it's had a lot of pollution problems over the years, and we're working to make it more of a public asset. And now, just to get into why oysters are so important for the environment, this is a little section of one of our oyster reefs, and you can see the complex 3-dimensional habitat that's created by the oysters. So all of that interstitial space becomes habitat for other animals. And so oysters filter the water, they provide food and habitat for other animals, they stabilize the bottom, they can protect the shore from storms and wave events. And what's happening in New York is we've removed all the oysters from the harbor, so we're trying to restore them back. Here's a little sample of some of the animals that we see on our oyster reefs. So you have a red-beard sponge, an oyster toadfish that actually eats oysters, little mud crab, seahorse, another, this is a species of tunicate called a golden star tunicate, and lastly are oyster drills that actually also eat oysters. And that's where, this is the beautiful East River. So if anyone tells you the East River is gross, they're lying. It's actually a beautiful place to be on the water. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'm excited to introduce Frank, the social studies teacher at Harbor School. So thanks so much for coming, Frank. I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Great.
There he is.
Great. Can you guys see me? Awesome. Well, thanks, Pete. Yeah, I've been teaching social studies at the Harbor School for the last 3 years, and our school is a maritime focused school. We have, as Pete said, the career and technical education group, and they, as Pete said, work with the Billion Oyster Project. But the cool thing about the Billion Oyster Project is that it really allows the kids to have a sense of ownership and to really get engaged when they connect with the water. A lot of times kids will feel like the problems of the world that we have are just, it's just too vast and too big, and they feel helpless. But by focusing on something as specific as New York Harbor, something that our kids can see and with their own eyes every day, it gives a sense of focus. And then when you combine that focus with tasks that are hands-on tasks where they are getting wet and dirty and all of that, they really feel a sense of ownership. And then finally, that's followed up with observation and analysis, and so the kids can actually see the results of their effort, and so they really respond to that, and it's really a lot of fun. The kids are really curious about oysters, and if you think about it, oysters are kind of funny. They're certainly unusual, and so kids are really attracted to that. And there's really nothing better than watching a ninth grader who's never eaten an oyster before have one for the first time. That can really be a lot of fun. So there really are a lot of advantages to working with the Billion Oyster Project, and we really have a good time with it. We think it makes a big difference. And by the way, I'm a 7-year colon cancer survivor, so I'm very appreciative to the American Cancer Society and all of the things that they do. So way to go.
Thanks, Frank. That I can't imagine what kind of an education when I growing up, if I would have been able to do something like that. I remember growing up on the West Coast, close to the beach. I always wanted to be a marine biologist, but there was marine biology class. To have done this, my career might have taken a different path entirely. So, thank you very much, Frank, and thank you very much, Pete, for your time. And we're going to go ahead and wrap today up with really the guy that made this thing happen today. And that would be Joe Gillette. And I've just been so proud to be a good buddy of Joe's and a fellow warrior in the fight against cancer. So Joe, I know you've had a great time tonight. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to wrap this thing up. Let's get you on video and get you unmuted. Let's see here.
There we go.
Yeah.
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Can you see me? How do I look, Steve? What a shucking good night, huh? How many times have we used the word shucking? How about it, Brooklyn? What a shucking good night. Wow, it is getting rowdy over here. We haven't even taken out the good oysters yet. You know it. Just an incredible night, Steve. Always a pleasure. It's such a wonderful program. I want to thank all our celebrities, Julie, Gardner, Pete, Frank, Robin, Randy, great music. We want to thank our staff partners that helped us out, Laura and Linda, and a special shout out to Margaret, who really kind of worked us through this, step by step, just to make it a wonderful program for everyone. To my fellow volunteers and supporters, the mission of the American Cancer Society needs to be funded, and we need you more than ever. Steve and I have worked this out, so the money raised tonight and the money you put towards your donation is going to come back right to each of your communities. So for my friends in Arizona, the money from the donation tonight, that's going back to Arizona, Iowa, California, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, everybody, this money's coming back to your community. So if you had a good time tonight, do me a favor, throw another $25 and add it to your own fundraising. Let's continue this fight. The world, like I said earlier, is upside down, but the fight against cancer doesn't stop. It's research we need. These patients need the services. We got to keep doing it. And again, my fellow volunteers, I know you're the most passionate, wonderful volunteers in the world. Be creative, collaborate with each other. Let's all work together and find a cure for cancer. Thank you, everybody across the nation, for tuning in. Let's shuck cancer, and let's keep doing it all year long. Thank you, Steve. Good night, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. Enjoy your oysters and enjoy the rest of the night. Have a great night.